All right, so let's begin. Welcome to our webinar today. I am Eva, the Director of Education, and we are here to learn more about building student agency through digital skills with our VP of Education, Mark Burnett. Yay!
Hello.
All right. So today we're going to go through, I'm going to give you a little introduction about BSD education, and then we're going to go into the content, and we'll have some time in the end for Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to just pop them into the chat, and we will come to them at the end. Oops, sorry. So BSD Education, we are a global team of educators, entrepreneurs, and technologists who have come together to design, develop, and deliver programs of learning to support teachers to bring relevant digital skills into the classroom. And to do that, and to support teachers in doing that, we put together the curriculum, the professional development, training, and support that is delivered on our learning platform, BSD Online. And with all those elements combined, we are able to deliver real impact to the learning in the classroom. So you may wonder, what does BSD stand for? So BSD stands for Build Something Different. And our curriculum is built around diverse digital projects like opportunities to develop web apps, video games, e-commerce websites, for example, to give students the opportunity to explore the connections between digital skills and different industries. So students learn with us and they get to build something different. So now let me pass over to Mark to tell you a bit more about himself.
Well, thanks, Eva. That was a great intro to BSD. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Give me just a sec. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Mark, and I'm the Vice President of Education for BSD. And I help to design the webinars that we're doing today, as well as overseeing the curriculum development process for everything that we do at BSD, which means upholding the pedagogical values that we have instilled and designing innovative practices so that students can learn in the classroom with those pedagogical approaches. I'm also a PhD student at Chiang Mai University, which is in Thailand, which is where I'm coming to you live from. And Eva is in Hong Kong. So at BSD, we're kind of a global company with members all over the world. So the topic for today is about increasing student agency with digital skills. So the goal will be to discuss how can we bring about more agency for students? How can we bring about more choice in the classroom for students? But since the topic is about using digital skills as a means for increasing agency, I think it's first important that we discuss what do we mean by digital skills. And I think that digital skills is a loose term that if we were to ask 10 different people, we would get 12 different definitions. So I want to first kind of explore what we mean by digital skills, because that might help you in your classroom or you're at school to kind of define what digital skills mean in your particular learning environment. So I just want to say that we're not saying that these are the most important digital skills, or these are the only digital skills that are effective or useful or purposeful. They're the ones that we have decided to use as a part of our curriculum building process. So we hope that by sharing what we're doing at BSD, that will help you to build custom and innovative learning processes for your students. So we've come up with this hierarchy of skills, and we call this our map of digital skills. And there's kind of a creative core set of skills that are used to solve problems. Embedded inside of those are when students learn hard skills. When we say hard skills, it's like the programming skills and the coding, programming, data, these kind of things. And then the soft skills are the communication and collaboration type of skills. And we think that all of these skills really need to go together hand in hand in tandem, and they can't be taught necessarily in isolation. So all of our projects at BSD use these skills in a scaffolded way to increase agency. I'll explain as we go through the webinar how we do that and which of the skills we use. So first, let's talk about the top tier of the hierarchy, which is the creative skills. So the creative skills that we've chosen to use are computational thinking and design thinking. Now, that's just because the nature of what we do at BSD. We design a curriculum that teaches students how to program and code with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So like Eva mentioned earlier, we have a platform and students are learning how to build websites, video games, web applications, e-commerce websites, all things that exist on the web. So because we're using a lot of computer programming, we think that computational thinking, which is the underlying process for how to solve problems using computers, is one of our core creative skills. Alongside that, because we are designing a lot of front-end things, which are visual, they're things that people use and that people see every day, design thinking has been proven to be an effective strategy and model for coming up with new projects or solving problems. So these two creative skills combined together create a very powerful approach to solving problems. And when students start to have practice using these two skills, they kind of take this powerhouse and they can apply it in different endeavors. They can apply it towards future learning. And these are things that can take you all the way through college and career. So a little bit more about these two particular skills. And there is actually research that shows how these two skills come into play. So if you've ever heard of like convergent and divergent thinking, it's very popular, especially when we're talking about students' flexibility and differentiation in the classroom. So I like to describe using this graph here that if we're solving a problem, we need to come up with a lot of opportunities and a lot of choices and a lot of options. So divergent thinking is when we come up with a long list of ways that we could solve that problem, all right? And then convergent thinking is taking that list of choices and then narrowing it down to the actual choice that we're going to make to solve that problem. So design thinking is the divergent process where we come up with solutions and we prototype until we have enough of these ideas that we want to move forward with. And then computational thinking is using a systematic way of solving a problem using technology and computers to then create and make those things. So at BSD, when we say build something different, this is what we really mean. We want students to solve problems by building actual projects. So all of our curriculum is about building real-world projects, tangible things, and artifacts, digital artifacts, using this process. And the cool thing about the way that we approach this is that we don't teach our students this process. We don't tell them, okay, now we're doing computational thinking. Okay, now we're doing design thinking. Okay, here's how they come together. We use a natural and scaffolded method where this just happens naturally. And then over time, especially as students are in upper grade levels, high school and beyond, then we start to teach them the names and the methodologies of these things, because I think it would be really boring to teach sixth graders divergent and convergent thinking and showing them this map. So instead we just put them in the process and they go along with it, but they're learning this process subconsciously. So next are, if you remember the graph that I showed you earlier, we had the creative skills, then underneath that we have the hard skills. And so the main 3 or 4 hard skills, I combined HTML and CSS here, where other people might want to separate that out. These are the main skills that we teach at BSD when it comes to learning the hard skills. And because all of the projects that we create are built on web platforms, these are the main languages that web browsers use and interpret. So we start off our students at the beginner level, teaching them basics with HTML and CSS to build websites, web pages, and simple web applications. Then we start to bring in JavaScript, which is the more advanced programming language, which can cause interactivity. And then we've recently introduced Python at the beginner level because we want to expand this curriculum and teach students also a little bit about how things work on the back end of the programming environment for web applications. So if you're trying to come up with a skills matrix for your technology program at your school with your students, these may be appropriate, or you may decide that you want to include other hard skills. For example, some schools include makerspaces as part of their technology education program. So some of the hard skills that students would need to learn are 3D design, laser cutting, 3D printing, etc. So we're sharing this just to show you the framework that we've used to guide our instructional methods. But of course, in your own instructional situations, you'll want to come up with what works best for you. The soft skills that we focus on at BSD, we've actually come up with a whole framework called CARE, which stands for curiosity, adaptability, resilience, and empathy. Now, in the soft skills area, there are dozens of soft skills, and there's different frameworks. Like there's another one that's called like the 4 C's, which is like communication, collaboration, some other 2 that I'm forgetting at the moment that are probably on our list. But Eva, for CARE, will you drop a link into the chat for people who want to learn more about this framework? So we've had other webinars about CARE where we go into more detail about how we implement the CARE framework as a part of our soft skills. And we value these soft skills so much that we actually have a annual CARE Awards in which we select educators from around the world who are using BSD, and we exemplify what they've been doing in the classroom and award and acknowledge their work in each of these categories. So the link that Eva just shared will give you more information about that, interviews with the teachers who have won the awards, the recipients, and how it's impacted their classroom. So like I mentioned earlier, there's a ton of other soft skills. We have decided to go with this particular framework because it's part of our learning philosophy and it guides what we do. Eva, you've been using our curriculum and teaching high school students for a while, and I've heard you talk about the CARE philosophy with those students. Do you have like an anecdotal example of how CARE may have been carried out in one of your classes with our students?
Yeah, so I teach 16 plus students, age 16 plus, and the students go through this throughout their whole learning journey during our Tech Future Connect to Work program. So for each of the assignments that they do, first the students get curious about the topic that we're talking about, and then through that curiosity, they become more connected to the project and the topic that they're doing. Mm-hmm. And then through that, we actually do a lot of client work as well in Tech Future and Connect to Work. So adaptability, resilience, and empathy comes through when students learn to collaborate and communicate with clients too. So yeah, the CARE model reappears and reoccurs throughout their whole learning journey with us. And I think the impact is amazing, like that the students, I think the connection, and I'm sure Mark is going to talk more about the agency, the ownership of their own learning through CARE is really impactful. They really care about what they do.
Well, I think that's what's great about it is that the acronym works itself as its own explanation. Mm-hmm. We want students to care, and we care about what they do. So it goes in both directions, and right. It's really solidified at BSD how we develop curriculum, how we approach our students, and how we expect our students to respond back to their assignments and also with themselves and each other. So mm-hmm. It's a very powerful process. And like I said, if you want to learn more about that, check the link that Eva put into the chat because we do have another 45-minute webinar that goes into more detail about just this part alone. So in the framework, We've got the hard skills, the soft skills, and the creative skills. But there are lots of other skills that we also fit into the work that we do. So earlier I mentioned that the main hard skills are HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Python. Now, inside of that, there's more nuanced hard skills. So for example, when students start to get to a greater level of detail in our curriculum, they'll start to learn about artificial intelligence, they'll build databases, they'll build video games with virtual reality, they'll learn more about user experience and user interface, and the list goes on and on. And then beyond care, we also, tab onto the 4 C's, the rest of them: communication, collaboration, critical thinking, problem solving. Those things are all important to us. And especially with our older students who are preparing for college and career, we want them to be able to plan their workout, have time management, and be able to work amongst each other in a team. And I think that those are also really important elements when it comes to student agency, is teaching students and then also giving them the room to plan out their work, plan out the time management for that work, and then work collaboratively in teams in order to successfully divide up and conquer that work. So, this webinar is about building agency, but we had to kind of first lay the groundwork of the digital skills that we're using to bring about more agency. So I hope this helps you kind of think about how can you classify and how can you articulate which creative skills, hard skills, and soft skills are most important to you in your school or your environment, and then how can we document those and share them so that there's kind of a common language that's being spoken at your campus, which is all pointing towards a common goal and a common understanding. So it's also important to mention that these skills aren't ever really taught in isolation. They're continually developing these skills, and they're growing and expanding. So I mentioned earlier that we kind of start off with teaching HTML and CSS. So, but even in our most difficult curriculum, the classes that Eva teaches, which she teaches a course in programming, and students design an e-commerce website. So even in that course, students are still using their introductory level knowledge on HTML and CSS. Is that right, Eva?
Yeah, that's correct.
So in
HTML, CSS, as well as JavaScript.
Yeah. And in that e-commerce project, tell us a little bit more about what it is that students are making. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so for the e-commerce website, the students first learn how to create the user interface using HTML and CSS. And then they kind of go through the laborious code. And then we're like, actually, there are frameworks out there that programmers use. And then we show them how the fundamental knowledge from HTML and CSS connects to real world tools and processes that programmers use. Then we take on JavaScript, and then within the BSD Online ecosystem, the students learn about how a database online is related to and linked to an e-commerce website and how that is used. So that's kind of that project in a nutshell.
Yeah, so it's a really good example that shows how the creative skills, the hard skills, and the soft skills all come together, and that the knowledge is building over time. And so this approach to learning is different than the traditional approach to learning. And I'm just going to give an example from when I was teaching in the public school system. I taught middle school science, and in the first semester, I would teach earth science. So we would learn about geology, rock formations, volcanoes, weathering, erosion, deposition, all of these things, the earth processes. And then the semester after, the spring semester, then we would learn about the animal kingdom, and which animals eat which, and like the carnivores and herbivores and omnivores. But those are isolated skills that don't really, or isolated concepts of knowledge that don't evolve and expand. It's like we open one book, close it, and then we open another book and close it, and there's not a lot of cross connection to that. But so this model of education is built in a scaffolded way so that knowledge continues to grow and expand, so that we're always using the knowledge that we started with, and we're just growing and expanding that over time instead of closing the book on that first chapter. So when we teach HTML and CSS, we use it all the way through to the last project. But we're growing what they learn about that, and then we're adding JavaScript. We might be adding Python to that, so it's expanding and continually developing. All right, so this is just a snapshot of the BSD digital skills progression. So I mentioned that we start with HTML and CSS. We do happen to have an introductory level block-based coding program using Scratch. So if students need to start at that level, we have that available. But then we kind of want students to gain more and more HTML and CSS skills. Then they bring in JavaScript. And then once they've got some pretty good coding chops, then we start to blend in these other ancillary elements like business development, artificial intelligence, user experience, marketing, entrepreneurship, and like what Eva is teaching, e-commerce. So these skills progressions, they start to get blended together so that the creative skills, the hard skills, and the soft skills are all together and not taught in isolation or separated. So this is our digital skills progression. So, if you're teaching digital skills this year, or you're in charge of having to come up with something like this, I recommend that you take something like this and develop your own progression. It doesn't have to be the same one as ours, but it should match whatever is the purpose and design of your school and whatever the goals are of that school, which could be digital skills, or it could be mixed together with other STEAM and engineering or maker-oriented types of projects. All right, so now that we've talked about the digital skills, the goal is to then see how we can use those digital skills to help increase student agency. And so before we go further, I kind of want to just confirm and elaborate a little bit more exactly on what do we mean by agency. So I'm just going to read this. You can follow along. It says that learning through activities that are meaningful and relevant to learners, driven by their interests and often self-initiated, with appropriate guidance from teachers so that students can slowly take ownership. All right. So I've seen several different definitions of agency, and I think this one kind of hits the head, right, spot on. And it also includes that that with appropriate guidance from teachers. And this is an important concept because sometimes as teachers, we feel like we have to, do all of the work and basically provide all of the knowledge for students. But at BSD, our philosophy is that we don't necessarily always have the answers. And so it's our job as educators and teachers to guide students towards finding those answers, either with our help or on their own. And ultimately, if we're going to increase agency to 100% capacity for students, we would want students to be able to solve problems on their own without our help. That doesn't mean we're not going to help them. It doesn't mean we're just going to sit around and read novels in the teacher's desk while the kids are working. It just means that we're going to slowly transition them, especially as they get older, to taking ownership and responsibility for their own work, but with some support from us as well. So if we look at agency on a chart like this, typically when students are working with curriculum of any kind, they start off by reading something, or they start off by doing a project, and this they don't feel connected to it. So they say, this isn't mine. This is what someone else wrote. This is what someone else did, and I'm just learning about it. Then when I dig deeper into that and I discover how these things work, if it's a digital skill like building a website, okay, I have a basic understanding of HTML. I've done a couple of little projects. I've done a few things, and now I'm going to remix the site and kind of make something that's partially mine. So I'm taking the thing that wasn't mine first. I've added my own information to that, and I've kind of modified or tweaked it. Then finally, once I have confidence and experience doing that, I can start from scratch and I can create something that's 100% mine. So this is the goal of student agency. And I don't think that agency can be described as a whole. I think we have to look at agency in little micro bits of areas. So we might take, just for example, one of the hard skills like HTML and CSS, all right? Because a student might have complete agency in HTML and CSS, but as soon as we start to teach them JavaScript, which they have no experience with, then they're going to come back here to not mine with JavaScript, but they're still going to have the confidence and the agency of HTML and CSS. So this is a scaffolded approach in which we give them a chunk of knowledge, they get sufficient with that and proficient with that, and then we start with a new set of learning that's not theirs, and then we go from there. And it's kind of this up and down graph. So when we're increasing agency, students should also be increasing their responsibility, their ownership, their skill, their ability, and their confidence to complete those things. Because eventually we want students to be completely independent without the need for assistance from the teacher, so that they can go out on their own into college, into career, and beyond. So our theory of action at BSD, and this is once again just our example, this is our pedagogical approach and what we've decided to do and we found great success in, and everything that we do at BSD is rooted in research-based methods, which actually have been certified by Digital Promise, which there's a whole other webinar where you could probably go to watch about that. But our first core philosophy and our theory of action is that we believe that students should be learning by doing, which is part of the reason, the name of our company is Build Something Different. We want students to build things. They're actually coding, making projects. So the next part of that is using real code. So instead of using text, or instead of using block-based coding or Scratch, we teach real HTML, real CSS, and real JavaScript, because those are the programming languages that actually run the internet. The table of skills, the creative skills, the hard skills, and the soft skills, those are all what we call transferable skills. That means that they could take what they learn from BSD and they could apply those to other projects, to other types of learning, to college, to career, and beyond, which then ultimately equals increased student agency. And the way that we also help with that at BSD is that we provide a digital portfolio. So everything that students create at BSD goes into a digital portfolio in which they can share that later on. Eva, you've had some students make digital portfolios. Tell us a little bit about what that means to them and how it's affected them.
Yeah, so every single project that the students do, they learn to interact with it, they create it, they understand the purpose of it. And then what I do with my older students is they go through a curation process as well. It's not just, okay, every single project that I've done, I'm going to include in my portfolio and share it. So there's also a conversation about what projects they're connected to, and pull in some reflection points as well for students to consider what they enjoyed about the project. Why does this project matter to me? Why are they including it in their portfolio as well? And for the two of my students, they actually took that portfolio and they were able to get freelance work with a local agency here for app design after they have completed the UI and UX unit. So
That's remarkable.
I think it's really cool that by having that portfolio, you have a set of work that you can reflect on, and you learn more about how you learn and what you're passionate and connected to. But then there's also that very practical element there where it is something that you can take into the real world to get you a job offer or get you a university offering. So there's a lot of interesting opportunities that students can gain from building portfolios.
Yeah, I mean, that's our theory of action right there in practice. It shows how students were able to achieve ultimate agency because they used their portfolio of work to actually get internships. So I mean, that's a proven effective model right there. All right, so along with our theory of action, the way that we gradually teach students the concepts and the skills that I mentioned earlier is that we start off students with video guided lessons. And so these are highly detailed, structured video guided lessons where every step of the way students are guided. So when they're novices and they don't know anything about web design, anything about HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, these video guided lessons go through and teach you everything you need to learn. That's kind of our beginner level curriculum. Then we take off the training wheels a little bit And we have guided projects, which are text-based guided projects. So we're leaving the videos behind and we're going into a similar style of projects where they're step by step, but they're guided. Then we can move into what we call sandbox templates, which means that they have less guidance and less curation because students already have a certain level of efficacy with code. And then finally, for ultimate agency, a sandbox is basically just a blank page. So if you're going to write a paper, and you just have a blank page instead of having an outline or having another method to help you, you just start writing. So a sandbox is just an empty code page where you can start writing HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. So we don't start students off with this. That would just be too difficult. So we have this scaffolded approach. And those of you in education are probably familiar with what's called the gradual release method. That's a tried and true pedagogical approach that has its roots in literacy and reading, but can be applied to other areas as well, especially digital skills and technology skills. So another way that we increase and support agency is by doing away with traditional assessment. So traditional assessment is multiple choice questions that only allow for one right answer. But when we're solving complex problems using computational thinking and using design thinking, convergent and divergent thinking, we come to realize that there are many ways to solve a problem. So we can't therefore justify giving students a quiz that only has one right answer. So what we do instead is we provide teachers with a rubric that allows for lots of flexibility and for students to have a conversation instead of a traditional assessment. So we're still assessing students because there's a criteria of which we expect the students to reach. So we look at these three main areas. And by the way, this is just our example. So I'm not saying you have to use these three elements, but come up with a rubric that works for you and your school and your needs. But for us, we look at the visual design of the project, we look at the content, and we look at the overall effort. And so with this rubric, we don't just assign a grade value, like you get a 90 in visual design, a 80 in content, and a 100 in overall efforts. That's not how it works either. What it's meant to do is it's meant to stimulate a conversation with that student so that you can tell the students what they've done well and celebrate what they have learned, but also provide critical feedback for areas of concern. Eva, do you have any experience with using our rubric with your students, and what was the conversation like?
Yeah, so it's actually a great conversation starter and provides a great structure for giving feedback. And students are clear from the start of the assignment what we're looking for. And it's simple to understand for students as well. And yeah, it's a great way to provide reflection and feedback. And also for students to ask questions too. So when students want they're in the middle of an assignment, a project, and they'll adopt the language and say, oh, can you give me some feedback on the content specifically or the visual design? And if I identify, oh, you're not really putting a lot of effort in this, like there's a language and provides a great structure that's simple to use and in different scenarios and for different projects.
Yeah, yeah. I like how you mentioned that it's also something that you want to start with. So, our assessment philosophy is that assessment shouldn't be a surprise. We don't believe in pop quizzes. We believe that students should always know in advance how they're going to be measured. And so we use this rubric as a way to kind of start the conversation when they are beginning a project about these are the areas in which we will be assessing you. There is room in each of these, there's wiggle room, right? Of course, but in a general sense, this is what we're looking for. So while there's no concrete definition of what overall effort means, we look at their time management. How did they solve the problem? What was their communication across the project? And then how did they express their creativity along the way? So like I said, it's more of a conversation and less of a grade that we would put on a report card. And that's our philosophy of how we assess projects. And we encourage teachers to adopt this type of assessment because it's been proven to increase and support agency, which means we're moving students away from needing us and needing support and needing training wheels into doing things on their own so that they can be successful in the future, like the students that Eva mentioned that were able to go on and get an internship. All right, so the last part of the webinar I want to talk about is something that you can use to kind of also augment and help with student agency, and that is providing students with voice and choice, which means you're providing opportunities for students to choose how they're going to share their learning. So here are just a few examples of voice and choice across a variety of different areas, not just in digital skills. So you'll see here on this graphic, there's a list of written products, presentation products, technological projects, which we've talked a lot about today, and then other types of media products. So, you know, if I'm not teaching, you know, a strictly digital design class, you know, let's say that I'm a middle school, you know, literature teacher, for example, and I want, and it's part of my job, or it's part of the curriculum, or part of the content that students are going to read a book, they're going to read a novel, and then they have to present back in some way what they learned from that novel. All right. So in the traditional classroom, we might just have them write a paper, you know, old-fashioned pen and paper, pencil and paper. All right. But if we want to give students voice and choice to help increase their agency, we would allow them other ways to demonstrate what they've learned. So this is just a list of possibilities of things that students could do. So, you know, if a student wanted to, they could make a puppet show that demonstrates the learning. They could make a video game that demonstrates the learning, or any kind of thing that they want to do. Now, the inundating thing about voice and choice is that sometimes when you have so much choice, it's hard for you to narrow down your idea into what you want to do. So I wouldn't suggest giving this list to students right away. What I might do is pick 2 or 3 from these different categories, depending on what the assignment is, and make sure that it matches to the content. So you also want to be careful with voice and choice when it comes to the content that you have to deliver, especially if it's tied to a standard. So if you're the middle school literature teacher and the standard says students must be able to write a 3-paragraph essay, then we don't want them to make a video game to show their knowledge, right? Because that goes against what the purpose of the intent of the content standard is. So as the educator, we always expect you to be in charge of making sure that the rigor of the standard and the content is being upheld. But within that, we are encouraging you to provide more voice and choice to increase student agency, but also to give students an opportunity to share their strengths. For example, this past summer, I was teaching a course in digital design, and one of my students asked me if he could make a rap video, and he was going to, you know, edit the video and then add it to a website. And at that time, I didn't know that he was kind of like a semi-famous YouTube rapper in Singapore. And had I not given him the opportunity for voice and choice, we would have never discovered that. I would have never known. He would have been able to use his strengths and talents to share his learning. So I think it also opens up doors for you to learn new things about your students and to celebrate their strengths. So here's another example. And so, you know, another literature example, let's say that students have to read a novel, and then the traditional book reports. Eva, did you ever have to write book reports in grade school?
So many.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm curious if this is even still a thing that teachers do in the classroom as a book report. But like you, yeah, I wrote many book reports, and it was always this kind of template. You know, like who were the characters, what was the summary, what were the main events, what was the conclusion, what is one thing you learned from it, whatever. And so that's one way you could do it. But with voice and choice, if you gave students an opportunity to make something, especially if it's a digital product, students could use a website template and make an interactive kind of ebook experience where they're basically explaining the same information, but they're doing so in a way that is with what they know how to do. And so this is a way to increase agency. Tips for voice and choice. Like I mentioned earlier, let students share their strengths. This helps you and it helps them. Don't get in the way, which I don't say that to be mean, but I say that because sometimes as teachers, we don't let students move into territories that we're not familiar with. And so because we might be afraid of the unknown, we kind of have this fear because we're not the expert, which is the next bullet says you don't have to be the expert. So let's say you are that literature teacher and you want to have your students, give them the freedom to build a digital product of some kind, but you're not a coder. You don't know how to do any of that stuff. That's okay. You want to let students kind of go on their own. And it's your job as the educator to help them find the resources that they might need in order to help them. If they needed help with a digital experience, you could always reach out to BSD. But another thing that I want to point out, though, about student voice and choice, because of my experience with this, is that students might start to gravitate towards the things that they're really good at. So I might have a student who's a really good programmer. So every time I give voice and choice for a project, they might gravitate towards building a website or a video game. And what I've noticed is that this student has done that 2 or 3 times. And I haven't seen them increase their skill level in that, even though they're still meeting the standard. So I always encourage my students to learn new skills in whichever area they choose. So if I have that student who's making the video game, I'm going to ask them, hey, what could you maybe do something different with the graphics in the video game? Could you move from a 2D to a 3D type of video game? Or could you add artificial intelligence as a layer in the video game for the opponent characters, whatever? I'm always thinking of ways for students to increase their new skills, even if there's voice and choice involved with that. So once again, I want to kind of wrap this all back up together by saying that all of the skills, whether they're digital or not, creative skills, hard skills, and soft skills require continual skill development if you really want to see real agency grow. So the old-fashioned way of learning one thing, closing that book, opening another book, and then learning that thing isn't the way to help students gain agency. But having a skill set and then practicing that skill set, adding more skills to that, and growing that skill set is the way to increase agency. So that was a lot to cover in this short session, and there's probably a lot for you to think about and to unpack, but I'll stop there and I'll let Eva take back over and share more about some opportunities that we have that you can engage with BSD for free.
All right, thank you so much, Mark. That was a very jam-packed session with lots of ideas and theories, but I learned a lot, as you always, by doing webinars with you. So I want to talk to you guys about some free projects. So depending on different parts of the world, back to school is coming back. Consider incorporating some of our projects into your planning as well. So there are 3 main ways that you can bring BSD into your school. The first is a free trial. There are a handful of great projects that you can bring into the classroom just today. Or there's also this Teach model, which is a single teacher subscription where you will have access to 30 student accounts where students can also have access to our selection of projects. Build is where you will have access to our full curriculum, as well as training and support and live chat, and access to all the different features on BSD Online. So these are 3 main ways. But with the free projects, as we talked about, it's something that you can bring into your classroom just today or the next day. And there's some great projects here that allow students that you can bring into the selection of voice and choice projects. Trivia game is a great one. that I love to use with my students. You can use it in science, math, any scenario really, and subject. And my favorites website, the students learn through a favorites website, but then they can recontextualize it into a book report like Mark showed us, or a science report, or a website about their holiday or any passion area really. So your feedback is very valuable. So Mark's going to share a feedback form in the chat link. So please take time to fill that in for us. And thank you so much. Now it's time for questions. Let me stop sharing my screen. Dun, dun, dun.
Do we have any
All right.
any questions, Eva?
Let me see. We do have some questions. Great. Oh, I have this question too. What if students don't want agency, Mark?
What if students don't want agency? This is sometimes an issue, right? Because I think what it boils down to is a misunderstanding between the definition of agency. All students want agency, right? Every student wants the independence. They want to be able to have the teacher leave me alone. They just express that in different ways. And I think if you have a student who's struggling and who might need more support, it's not because they don't want agency. It's because somewhere along the way in the creative skills, in the hard skills and the soft skills, there's a gap. And if students are at a place where we're expecting them to have agency, but they have a gap in their skill or a gap in their knowledge, then there's going to be confrontation happening there. And so it may look like the student is saying, I don't want to do this, or I don't want agency, or this is too much. And what's really going on underneath the surface there is that there's a gap in the skill. So this is where you as the educator need to come in and identify where that gap is, help the student overcome that gap so that then agency will start to flow naturally. Because all students want us to leave them alone.
Yeah, a lot of the times I think it's really the confidence. It comes for us as adults as well. And when we're given the choice of like, you can go and do anything you want. And if we're not familiar with that area, it's we don't want to do it.
and the confidence comes from knowing the skill. You know the skill really well. You know it so well that you feel confident about your use and ability of that skill.
Yeah, for sure. Just sending any. Okay, there we go. The feedback form link was not working, so I sent a new link. Yeah. And one final question before we wrap up. What are the most useful digital skills?
What are the most useful digital skills? So we have that long list of digital skills. And I think that the most useful ones are the ones we mentioned earlier, the creative digital skills. So being able to solve problems. That's what the world needs, right? That's pretty much what the point of education is not necessarily to be good at reading and writing and so on and football, if you're from certain parts of the world. But what we really want students to be able to leave education with the ability to solve problems. And so the methods that we've chosen to teach students to solve those problems is computational thinking for digital reasons, and then design thinking to solve pretty much any other problem. So those two combined create this powerful problem-solving duo. And I would say that those are the most effective, or the most useful skills that we can walk away with.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. We're out of time, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Awesome. We will see y'all next time.
Bye.
Bye.